Hey Sopranos fans! Welcome to another episode here on Soprano Street, and we are here today to compare Tony and AJ Soprano. While there won't be a lot of Many Saints references, we do see in the movie that young Tony was a lot more like AJ than his memory served. A young Tony wasn't as tough as he remembered, and both he and AJ enjoyed pulling stunts. But with Tony hijacking ice cream trucks while AJ is only vandalizing swimming pools...
How do you vandalize the swimming pool?
Tony always seemed to go a bit harder. By the end of the series, however, AJ is a mere shell of his father, possessing all of Tony's self-destructive nature without any of his strength. So how did this apparently huge difference between the two of them come to be? In evaluating this question, we will compare their traits, including whether or not AJ shared Tony's taste for violence, their upbringings, a potentially significant yet possibly overlooked event in AJ's life, the quote from Dr. Melfi which may explain why AJ seems more depressed than Tony, and ultimately the specific combination of nature, nurture, and circumstance that may explain the apparently vast difference between the two. When comparing their traits, upbringings, or anything nature-nurture related, it only makes sense that Livia and Carmela would come into play. After all, since half of AJ comes from Tony, half of Tony comes from Livia, and both were overwhelmingly raised by their mother, the answer to most questions in that vein would boil down to either Livia or Carmela. At first glance, Carmela is more passive and submissive, while Livia is smarter and more aggressive, which lines up pretty well with what we see in Tony and AJ respectively. This may play a part as to why AJ was so much weaker than Tony, but so would nurture. Quick side note, I'm not calling AJ weaker because he doesn't go around fighting everybody. I'm calling him weaker because I think he shares his father's taste for violence. He just lacks his father's courage, but we will get back to that. In regards to their upbringings, the differences in their mother's personality shine through in the manner in which they raise their children, and this can easily be seen in their respective parental styles regarding fighting. Carmela's more passive, after-the-fact response.
I got in a fight.
Well, I hope it was worth it. Hope you did as much damage to his wardrobe.
Stands in stark contrast to Livia's more proactive and aggressive method of parenting.
Take a bat with you.
At this point, it would be very easy to say the differences between their mothers, both genetically and parentally, explain their differences later, but this fails to take into account their similarities and different events that occurred to them in their lives. With Tony, we get to see these moments framed for us in flashbacks, and the Many Saints made it abundantly clear what the defining moment in Tony's life path was, but with AJ, we see much more of his childhood, making such moments less clear to the viewer. The non-fight with Jeremy Piacosta may be a significant factor in the difference between them on a couple levels, ironically because of one of their most notable similarities, namely their tendency towards depression. First, AJ is clearly embarrassed when he wins the confrontation due to who his father was and not because of himself. This is a pattern AJ likely would have recognized throughout his childhood, from his friend's obvious fascination with his father.
There's no fucking way I'm going to the army.
Yeah, because his old man will put a horse's head in some senator's bed.
To his girlfriend Devin Pillsbury.
I'm like a gangster dude's girlfriend.
No, you're a gangster dude's whiny-ass son's girlfriend. But anyways, even up through AJ's college friends.
If not, my father's sending my chick this week anyway.
Fuck that. If not, you see this guy right here? Tony Soprano Jr.
But we will get back to them in a bit, as that dynamic may come into play when determining if AJ had a violent side like Tony. Quick side question, how differently do you think Carmela and Tony would have acted if they had truly known the type of family that Devin Pillsbury was from? Personally, I think Carmela would have been walking on cloud 9, while Tony would have been poking holes in AJ's condoms, convincing him to try and slip one past the goalie.
Money, maybe the family owns the whole fucking block. You'll have to wind up with a big fucking score, you motherfucker.
The other aspect in which the non-fight may have affected AJ is brought into focus through a quote from Dr. Melfi.
Depression is rage turned inward.
As we discussed, even AJ's social distractions can be reminders of how he fails to stack up to his father, so he may not get the same leisurely relief from depression that Tony does, and if the embarrassment from the non-fight hindered AJ's aggressiveness moving forward, he may never really have learned how to direct anything outwardly. Not that Tony's method of venting is the best, but with little relief from leisurely activities and no knowledge of how to vent, AJ's rage would have nowhere to go but inward. After all, AJ was willing to fight, so it's not like he doesn't have it in him.
I'll fight you for it.
Yet we don't really ever see him get aggressive again until college. This brings us back to both the dynamic between AJ and his college friends, and the question as to whether or not AJ shares Tony's taste for violence, which would be quite significant when comparing the two, and both are best evaluated in the scene where AJ assists in the pouring of acid on Victor's foot. I said in the Jackie Jr. AJ comparison episode that I thought AJ appeared to like the violence, and this drew some debate in the comments section. Most of the criticisms were that he was prodded through peer pressure into it, and or he was disgusted by it and it sent him into a depression. So I'll take a second to explain why both are reasonable points, but ultimately I still think he enjoyed it. As to AJ being prodded into the whole ordeal, I completely agree, and this can be seen from the very beginning.
That welching little prick, you fucking kidding me?
You wanna come?
I don't know. I'm just gonna hang here.
Come on, it'll be fun.
AJ knows Victor owes money, he knows they're going to mess him up, though probably not to that extent, and he initially declines to join, but he changes his mind with very little goading. While this may just be because he succumbed to peer pressure, it may also be the first time he was invited to this sort of thing, and it wasn't because of his father's name. They weren't going there to threaten with the Soprano name. They'd done that already. They were going to act, and AJ knew it. Even after they had already taken Victor from the party into the woods to pour the acid, AJ still required a little more prodding to get involved in holding him down.
And what are we, fucking assholes? Hey, don't, come on, Mel, it's the shit. Yo, help us hold him down, come on. Come on.
So AJ was very clearly pressured into every aspect of that endeavor, and that's almost indisputable. But it's also irrelevant in terms of whether or not he enjoyed it. Tony clearly enjoys the violence, and he had to be prodded into committing his first hit by Paulie.
Come on, kid, do it.
When it comes to whether he enjoyed it or he was disgusted by it and was sent into a depression because of it, I don't think much weight can be put on the fact that he got depressed. Like Tony, AJ is prone to depression for a variety of reasons, and also like Tony, he seems to come out of it as soon as something new catches his eye. Rather, more attention should be paid to his facial expression during the attack, and that is a mixture of anger and adrenaline, which would likely be the same feelings Tony has in similar circumstances. Comparing this to Tony's expression during the Bevel Aqua hit, which you know he enjoyed, you see the same thing, an angry face. Appropriate given the setting. At this point, you have a kid with a tendency towards depression without the outlets, as well as an inclination towards violence without the courage to back it up, and it's easy to see how this could lead to inner turmoil. But it's two more factors, one similarity and one difference, that really cements the difference between Tony and AJ. The similarity is that they both seek the easy road, and the difference that makes that similarity relevant in this conversation is the roads they were presented with. For Tony, AJ's path was never an option. Johnny Boy and Livia never would have let Tony behave like AJ, so Tony would have been forced to either get a legitimate career, which we know wasn't going to happen, embrace homelessness, which also wasn't going to happen, or become a gangster. On the other hand, AJ was offered a path which enabled him to stay at home and do nothing, and he took it. For those of you who made it this far, I'll leave you with a hypothetical question regarding AJ. Obviously, a proper coping mechanism when it comes to depression would be ideal, but assuming for the sake of conversation that's not a possibility, would AJ have been better off learning to vent like his father and possibly becoming a gangster, or keeping it all inside? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Soprano Street. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.